All right, my friends. I'm here with a new friend, Lucas. You might know him as LC King. And I think today will be a very electrifying conversation. I've been looking forward to it all day. I'm a bit intimidated because this might be the most scientific conversation I've had to date in terms of electromagnetism and biochemistry. But I'm excited for it because I love learning. And I think we're going to have a really interesting chat, especially when we bring in mythological tropes. But Lucas, welcome, my friend. I know you just woke up recently, so good day in Australia. And I'm looking forward to asking you, because you've got a really cool YouTube channel. So this is a great place to start as far as your origins go. So, ritual first question, first time guest. So, Lucas, when did you start to speak your truth?
Oh, thanks for having me, Jake. It's good to be here. When do I start speaking my truth? It's ongoing. It's been just a journey of sort of unfolding as I get more information. It's not necessarily I had to go and speak some sort of truth. It was more like this information is pretty important. I probably should tell more people, and that was it. It wasn't really. Um, Most of the time when I was doing YouTube videos and things like that, you can see when I started out, I was basically a slideshow. I did no voiceovers or anything like that because I didn't really want to be a public figure. You know what I mean? I just wanted to share the information. And then as time progressed, I ended up doing more speaking and getting on like little radio shows and things like that. So I've got a little bit better at speaking at the public sort of side of things, but at the end of the day, I'm happy just to be hidden away somewhere and presenting information, sort of, through writing or something like that as well. So
Right on, man. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I've enjoyed your public appearances and everything you've been putting out. I just got to give a shout out to the two shows where I've seen you or heard you. That would be Rising from the Ashes with Danunaki and Homie Romy, and then also on our friend Chance from the Interverse podcast. You had a really cool episode with Topher Gardner, and there's a lot that you cover, which is impressive because there's the first phrase that comes to mind is like there's a correspondence, and this is something that I started to pay close attention to when I was introduced to Mario Garza of Symbolic Studies, and Gabe Slick Dissident, always finding correspondence between different subjects, maybe like in a more interdisciplinary way. But it seems like you have been focusing in or specializing in some electrical points of view and some models that help us rethink the way that we view the cosmos and this plane, this realm that we're on. And I apologize if you hear my cat meowing in the background. She's excited for this, but
it's
I
all good.
wanted to start with a question, just for people who maybe have never been to your YouTube channel. What is it called, and what kinds of things would they expect? Because I kind of gave like a broad overview, but how would you describe the videos that you've been putting out?
Well, the reason I started the YouTube channel in the first place was because I found the correspondence between our world and the battery and electrolysis and that sort of electrochemistry, it's called. And so, obviously, I'm working with a flat Earth model. Um, and so when you put it into that perspective, a whole range of different elements come to the surface. So once I had done that sort of correspondence between our world and the electrochemistry sort of science, and then I started to create videos on that. And in amongst that, because it's that science doesn't just stop at, say, a battery or things like that. It actually keeps going and goes into, so, well, how do cells in the body and how do we get energy as in ourselves? A whole range of different sort of topics come out of it because it's a fundamental of nature. In a sense, it is a modus operandi of nature itself. And so when you put the elements into play, um, it's really starts to, you can see it everywhere at play. And so it starts to create a holistic view in itself, and then you can start to apply that to other segments of your learning. And so, because if your foundation is holistic, it really does allow you to actually move into other topics with ease, and really cut through the bullshit that we're being told about stuff as well at the same time.
Mm.
Um, and fundamentally, when you look at the battery, especially like a flow battery or something like that, it is its simplicity really starts to shine, and it's really starts to speak about polarity. And that was the main thing that come out of all of this sort of electrochemistry is science, and applying it was that you have this polarity that creates the energy. So if you've got no polarization, you've got basically no energy. It's static in a sense. It's only when things start to polarize that there's sort of this push and pull that starts to happen. And so, that's what my channel was sort of diving into, is really uh, looking at some of the philosophy behind it. And I always sort of state in a lot of when I do talks and things like that, is that um, you basically, the spirituality and the science should not be disconnected. They should be one and the same. If you learn about science, you should learn about your own spirituality, and vice versa. And so when there is a disconnect, like we have in our world, where science is over in one side and religion and all that's over the other side, well, something's amiss, because at the end of the day, there is a unity to our world, as well as a dualistic nature, a multiplicity of nature. But underpinning it all is a unity. So if sciences and religions are coming from the same source, there should be no disharmony between them.
Yeah, that
So
makes
yeah, I'm
sense. And
sort
it's
of
good to bring up that phrase holistic because you're taking into account not just the very left brain empirical sciences, but also a spiritual point of view. And it reminds me of the Hermetic principles too. As far as correspondence goes, obviously there's the law of correspondence, but when we're thinking about batteries, we can understand how maybe our blood flow can kind of teach us about anodes and cathodes and how electricity flows out from one end, flows in from the other. And that's kind of what I'm excited to learn about today because I've been thinking about this polarity a lot, and I'm curious if you would allow me. There's a pop culture reference that maybe you're familiar with. Do you know that TV show Lost?
I've heard of it. Yeah, I haven't watched
Okay.
it though.
I went balls deep into Lost because about when I was about 8 or 9 years old, it aired live, and I watched it every single Wednesday. It was my ritual, like favorite show, and so part of the story is that on this mysterious island, deep underground, people find this pocket of really concentrated electromagnetic energy. And this energy, at first, they want to weaponize it, they want to figure out how to use it. It's also got like healing properties. So I'm kind of looking at this as a mirror, like a pop cultural mirror of the real world. And then eventually, this island has if this energy is released, it can be very violent and think of like an atomic explosion or something, some kind of like devastating energy, some devastating force. So they built this structure to house this electromagnetism to control it, to kind of like store it into this battery. Except, and this is where the numerology gets really fun, every 108 minutes it leaks out a little bit. So they got to push
Yeah,
this button to put the energy back into the battery before it leaks out and destroys everything. And every 108 minutes, they got to do this on this cycle. And as the airplane is flying over this island, the energy happens to leak out and it magnetizes, it pulls this plane down, and that's how it crashes. And that's what
yeah,
the entire series is based around, this like hollow earth electromagnetic nature of this world. And I'm curious, just as far as like free association or anything that you've researched yourself, what comes up for you when you think about those concepts?
Uh, well, it sounds like I've got a bit of a bent now on the northern sort of northern encodes that is all throughout TV as well as history basically. So it sort of reminds me of this sort of magnetic north and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's what straight away they're flying to an island, most likely in the middle of the world sort of thing. So yeah, that's what comes to mind, and it's what that is when explaining the true north or that magnetic center of our world. And every 108 minutes, well, is sort of like that's related to well, your moon cycles and things like that as well. So it's interesting little encoding. But when you're talking about the magnetic north and things like that, you're basically flying, in this sense, you'll be flying towards your inner self, and then you'll be dealing with all the problems that sort of arise when you go turn inwards, in a sense. And so there is a direct correspondence between the sort of mythology of the north and this turning within ourselves and dealing with what we need to deal with, but it's also how we get to basically a higher state or a higher understanding of ourselves, and then operate in a different way. So that's what a lot of it's sort of been confused nowadays because we have got two cosmologies at play. We've got the heliocentric model, and we've got the basically the what you would call the flat Earth model, and they're sort of in opposition in how you approach mythology. So a lot of it, when you're talking about the heliocentric model, you've got a sun at the center, and then all the planets are moving around it. And so that central part of our solar system or universe, in a sense, is the sun. And so, but before that, before this cosmology come into play, we actually had I call it a polar centric model.
Heard
And
Mario
so,
Garza say that too. It's interesting.
yeah, exactly. And so you have basically the sun and the moon at the same time size, and they are rotating around a central axis.
Mm.
And you actually see that in the sky, that great wheel, which is the stars moving around that central Polaris star. And so this world axis was sort of hidden in a sense, or it's the magnetic center and things, but it's sort of, in a way, it's unseen. And so it has that um yeah, just a quality that is very etherical in its nature. And so the two models they got, once there was the polar-centric model, and then the heliocentric model came into play. And so what ended up happening is that a lot of the ideas that were originally for the polar-centric or that central axis, and talking about that stationary, immovable pillar that holds the world together, um, is now transferred to sun type cosmology.
Mm.
And so what happens is all the gods or the personification of that world axis got switched to solar centric type understandings, and it really sort of took away from its actual real meaning, and it also started to disintegrate this idea of the Trinity as well. And the Trinity is extremely important, because it's not just a religious idea. It's actually fundamentally part of the battery. It's part of the energy, and it's part of polarity.
Would you consider it
So
to be like the sun, the moon, and then possibly the North Pole star or Polaris or this that's again, I'm so happy that you and Mario have been looking into this because it's really interesting. It's a cool way to reframe our understanding away from the solar system model, which I guess has offered quite a lot of understanding. But I think if you're going after the truth, it's interesting to look at both sides. So I'm curious, what did you imagine when we moved societally from lunar cults to solar cults? I know like there's a lot of Christ figures. Obviously like Jesus and Mercury can be personified in certain ways. But if we go backwards for a second, what are some striking characteristics of this lunar system, or maybe of other parts of the Trinity that most people don't quite understand, you think?
Okay, so essentially you have the Trinity. There's actually three of them. There's three Trinities, and you first have one that's based on time, which is past, present, and future. So time itself has a Trinity. And then you have space, which is length, width, and height. So that is, again, it's another Trinity. And then you have matter, which is solid, liquid, and a gas. And so there's triple trinities that sort of create our world. But the Trinity, in a sense, mainly a lot of it is to do with how time operates. And when you're talking about the sun, the moon, and the stars, then you're looking at three different times or ways to calculate time. And so there are ways to calculate cyclic events and all these sort of things that come from it. But when you put the galvanic model with this idea of the sun and the moon being polarities, as in one's hot, one's cold, one's dark, one's light type thing, they've got one sort of is in the night and one's in the day, that simplistic sort of viewpoint of them, then the stars become this middle ground between the polarities, and this is what is really interesting, because it actually goes back into a lot of the mythologies where you have the mother, the father, and the child. And so you've got the mother is a polarity, the father is a polarity, and the child is born from the two polarities and is a mixture between the mother and father. And so this mixture, um, this mercurial figure is all of us. And so we have a more distinct, we have both the sun and the moon within us, but we also have this idea of being the middle ground. Sorry, my voice is a bit croaky.
It's all right. Sound good.
Yeah, so we are this middle ground. We are this Mercury sort of character, and so we have both elements, is good and bad. The devil on the shoulder and the angel on the shoulder, those type of things, and that's where our energy sort of derives from, this constant pushing and pulling between wanting to do things in the future, thinking about the past, and so in reality, what a lot of the religions actually point to, especially Buddhism, will point to this middle way or this middle ground. And they're always saying, well, let's not be too polarized. Let's not go into excess one way or the other. Well, let's try and pull ourselves into alignment. And that being in alignment then is being in alignment with the world axis. So the correspondence of turning within, going into ourselves and being in alignment with ourselves, and then operating from there. And so this is where this is the basic principle of the Trinity, and it's a basic principle of this correspondence between us and our world. And you have the world axis also is it's immovable and it doesn't change. So the rest of the wheel, if you like, the wheel of the stars, is constantly changing. It's constantly moving through its cycles and seasons and things like that. But the central axis stays still. And so you have the polarity of time and timelessness. And so that's where we are as well. We're stuck between the two worlds in a sense that we are eternal and part of the unity and also part of the world of change that's constantly in flux. And in some sense, we can say the world of change is a little bit more of a non-reality because it's never in one spot. But the world of eternal unchanging is more of a reality in that sense. So there's this is where the polarity starts to really tell us about um, it starts to explain how life and death works in a sense. Because as soon as you're dealing with timelessness and time, and then these you can see how these are inbuilt within us and within the world, and then death and life are sort of just two sides of the same coin.
Then it begs that question, if batteries run out of juice, then you can recharge them. And, I'm thinking about, you got your positive and your negative charge, and life, our existence flowing between life and death. And then, at a certain point, that battery runs out, our heart stops, our lungs discontinue their compression and their contraction. And at the same time, the physical body's gone, but when we brought up the trinity of matter, we've got solid, liquid, and gas, and some people even throw ether in there, like another kind of substance. And it's interesting to think about the fact that when people die, they lose a bit of mass. Something leaves them, and it's this something, this quote unquote
Yeah,
something, this
what is it?
ether.
The 21 grams or something like
Yeah,
that.
right.
Yeah, I
It's
don't
wild to kind of contemplate that for a second, because then I would assume, all right, like let's take like photovoltaic, like a solar panel, and it's being absorbed. The sun is being absorbed into this panel, which charges a battery. When the sun goes away, there's a way to store this energy. Of course, I don't claim to understand it, but when the sun comes back, there's more energy available. And I feel like maybe I'm just kind of like jumping to a speculation here, but when a human being can pass away and their energy is like the sun being blocked by clouds, and once those clouds move away over time, that energy can be re-released, reabsorbed by that panel. And I'm curious, maybe how do you feel like your spiritual beliefs have transformed after looking into this new model, this polar model? Even though maybe we could say it's not a new model, but it was the old way that was
know.
hijacked
It's the
by
old
the
one.
new
Yeah.
ways. Yeah. So you started to touch on some spiritual truths, and this idea of the middle way and the middle path. But I'm curious if there's anything else, especially in regards to mythology and perhaps even Masonic symbolism too, because there's always the two poles, and then what lies between is really interesting there. So I know that's a lot to ask into one question, but what did you think
Well,
about?
firstly, I'll say with this model, um, it's the one that I deal with is hermetically sealed. And so that brings up a huge question in itself. What, if you've got a hermetically sealed world operating like they do with those, plants in jars, keep them in there for like 50 years. So it's not sort of like a shocking idea, really. Um, where does the energy go? It doesn't go anywhere. It just recirculates. And so that brings in a whole heap of questions in itself, as in, well, if it's set up like that, then you don't go anywhere. There's nowhere to go. There's nowhere, it sort of defeats this idea of escapism, where a lot of um, religions or modern day sort of stuff has this concept of, we've got to escape this world and get into the next one because this one sucks. Or we're going to go to heaven or we're going to go to hell or something like that. And when this fundamentally, when you're dealing with a hermetically sealed world and you're in it, then you don't have that escapism. That escapism is like, well, we're here, so what do we do? Well, let's make this world the best world we can. And so the concepts are fundamentally different to a lot of what gets preached out today. And it may make people feel better, that they're gonna get out and leave the matrix and go into something else, but it doesn't really help us or our children to have that viewpoint, because it actually hinders our world, because we go, oh, fuck it, we'll just deal with it in the next one or whatever it is. So that is a very important sort of belief system, if you like, or a product of studying this stuff, which is, I think, been very helpful in the way I deal with the world. And also learning about the polarity, and like I said, understanding this life death polarity that's going on, and it takes a lot of fear out of it, because you really get to know the polarities, and you know that they exist, and you know what they're doing and how important they are to life. And so those sort of concepts really do help someone sleep better at night. Honestly, it just does, and it helps you really keep level headed around everything that's going on. So the other thing, if you're looking at mythology, there is one of the main concepts that I've found that's been very helpful to understand some of the old mythology is looking at one of the other polarities, and that was between wind and water.
Mm,
And what I noticed with that was that if you change the W to an M on both those words, you'll get mind and matter.
mm.
And so when you're dealing with a lot of mythological sort of gods and stuff like that, you inevitably come to gods that are all to do with the air, or they're to do with watery sort of things. And so automatically now you can sort of see that anything to do with air, wings, birds, those sort of things are directly to do with the mind. So as soon as you see a winged disc, well, you know it's about the mind. The other thing is true as well. When you look at something to do with water, you know it's to do with the material world.
Mm.
And so anything to do with the breath, spirit, like you say, the leaving of the body, the breath leaves the body, all those sort of things are to do with the mind. And the breath and air does have a direct correspondence to how your mind is operating as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that direct connection into matter.
I actually
And
posted this video today. Someone had given me advice about anxiety, and they were talking about Tesla coil, or like a toroidal field. And when people have anxiety, it's because their air is trapped in their chest. It can't reach the top chakra. It's got to be able to circulate all the way up, but it gets stuck in the chest cavity. And they said, yeah, that's anxiety. Like it's gotta the energy must flow all the way up. The
uh,
wind, if it gets blocked, I guess it's not performing its function. And the other thing you said was really interesting is that matter and water correspond, mind, matter, and water, mater, like mother, is interesting too, because the maternal energy, the divine feminine, is very associated with water, and that's where life begins, and
and Mother
that's
Earth.
Mother Earth,
That's Earth
exactly. Yeah.
and material. She's all to do with and what's the matter. That's to do with your emotions. So there is a huge. That's what I'm saying. It sort of unlocks how we look at mythology because of that. Those associations between the feminine, matter, water. There's sort of like a dark correspondence to it, inward, a very um, just a timeless feeling to it, and it's in a sense, when you look at the geometry as well, this mother is represented by the Vesica Pisces, and so it is the mother that actually is the um, that births creation. In a mathematical sense, the Vesica Pisces is bringing forth a heap of mathematical constants and concepts. It's bringing together, bringing about proportion. It's building the seed of life, the flower of life, so the net of harmonia, or this tree of life. So the mother and the material are very are extremely important to the concept of the creation story. And the creation story, when I say that, it's constantly happening. It's not just a when did the world
You can
start
call it
type
the
thing.
creating story.
Yeah, exactly. And the other one, when you're dealing with mind, you're dealing with the father. So there's this polarity between, and the we are the child of that. So, like we said, we are the child in the Trinity, as in mother and father, and a mixture between our parents.
Mother Earth and Father Sky.
Yeah, and we live, yeah, basically in between the two, in a sense. We're built of material, and we have a mind, and so it's this light and dark, as in mother is to do with weight in heaviness, and the father is to do with light, as in things are not heavy. So it gets sort of a little bit confused with light of the sun and those sort of things, but generally it's
Yeah. Yeah.
and you're dealing with ether, like you said. Well, ether is originally understood as the air that the gods breathed. So it's basically the eternal mind, in a sense. You can think of it like that, but it's like that. Yeah.
I like to
So
think about ether as kind of like a Wi-Fi network that all of spiritual beings can tap into, and it's kind of funny because it's everywhere. It does come from the central point, this router, this modem, wherever that might be, maybe in the North Pole, and then it radiates out, and people can tap into it. Or as you say, the gods, they respire through it. They breathe it in, and it gives them life. And I feel like that's what happens when you take care of yourself. Like, we can talk about macro and micro, like the polarity. When you first brought up this concept, I thought about the cardiovascular system and how when they teach us about blood, they've got like the red side and the blue side, and they're going different directions. And this heart that we've got is like this amazing battery, if you want to call it that, with the anode and the cathode pumping out and in, and it's fascinating to think about the the potential, understanding the micro, something like electrolytes. And I've always been fascinated with the just the word play there, electric light. And I was kind of joking around with you because I planned to ask you about this. I got my electrolytes here. For people, if
yeah,
they're
yeah.
ever wondering why I'm so energized, it's because I always do podcasts when I'm fasting, and I take electrolytes. It's just like my favorite way. It's just the way my energy works. And without salt, without the potassium and the magnesium and all that, I don't function well. And I think I've heard you describe salt as being like a bridge. So when we think about electrolytes, could you kind of break this down? Because I'm
Okay.
very familiar with the maybe like not the mechanics and the electrochemistry of it, but I'm familiar with how it makes me feel. So maybe you can shed some more
Yeah,
insight on
okay.
that.
Um, okay, so electrolytes in general terms is just salt in water. And then what it does, because water by itself, if you have distilled water, it is non-conductive. So I don't know if people have seen videos of it, but you'll have a distilled water and you'll see a guy plugging in a power point under the water, and and the power point works. He doesn't get electrocuted. As soon as you add material into that, the salts into that water, it becomes conductive. electrically conductive. And so this is the main component in batteries, or the main liquid in the batteries, that allows the connection between the positive cathode, and the negative anode. And so there is that transference. Now there is also another thing that's within in the battery, and that's called a salt bridge. And that basically is a membrane, a porous membrane that allows that a slower flowing between the two different electrolytes. So it separates the electrolytes for each anode and cathode, and that is called a salt bridge. Now, it is that salt bridge, that limiting of the transference, that actually allows the battery to keep going and keep having energy over a period of time. Otherwise, it would go directly to equilibrium straight away. So in our body, if you want to correspond it to our body, we have, like you said, the red and the blue blood. One's oxygenated, one's not. And then you have the heart. Well, the heart is acting as like that bridge, or that between those two electrolytic fluids. And so it's that bridge between that is able to produce voltage. And so that's how, and basically, as far as I can understand, that's how your heart produces voltage, is two different electrolytic fluids. And there is actually an air battery that they have created that runs on oxygen, and has the same sort of principles as how we would operate by breathing to create the energy. But you do need good quality electrolytes for a battery. And so, like you say, when you're keeping your blood clean, or keeping your body clean by fasting, and then increasing the salts in your body, then you're increasing the conductivity of your body. And then you basically, charging up your brain, really. You're charging up the battery and feeling good. And so the other ways to do it is, there was another guy called Rene Quinton, and he was healing people with salt water from the sea, um, doing blood transfusions and helping a lot of people with that. Um,
Heard you guys talk about this in Rising from the Ashes. It's pretty interesting because the sea, once again, the mother is providing something nourishing. It's like the milk of the mother, but it's like the salt. And I going back to etymology, I love the fact that salary has its roots in salt, and the Roman soldiers would receive their salary, like their
ah,
salt, to keep them going, and
yeah.
it's very fascinating, and I appreciate, like, you broke down that bridge very well. Like, if I'm understanding correctly, so we talked about electrolytes, and if we move into a different arena like agriculture, you take like copper, for example. You
Yep.
have your field of soil, and if you place copper in the soil, just like you might place a salt or some kind of conducive element into water, it can generate a current. uh, does that
Yep.
make
Yep.
sense so far?
Yeah, well, that's right. As soon as you've got two dissimilar metals,
Hmm.
and then you've got in electrolyte, you're going to have an energy transfer.
So this
So
energy
as
transference can also happen in a garden, in a like some people can set up plants that respond in the same way that if you want to generate electricity, you got to get um your anode and your cathode connected by some kind of salt bridge. But how does this function in a garden? Because I find that fascinating, and I know it's probably like an
so,
old method that maybe has been lost to modern times.
so the study of this particular sort of science is really applying electrochemistry to farming, is called electroculture. So people can go on sort of the website Rex Research and have a hunt and look through the articles on electroculture, some of the patents, and things. So it's something that I've looked at, and haven't done myself, so I can only speak about it as in, it's there, and people say that it grows phenomenally sized vegetables, basically, and increases the fertility of the soil, and it does seem to be doing that, even when you say doing like a meager one, which would be putting a copper rod into the soil. That does seem to have some effect, whether it's increasing the conductivity between the sky and the earth that way, or there has been other ways where a guy has basically directly um, put wires into the ground and then wires above, and then done basically a polarity between the two, so you'd have positive charge at the top and negative in the ground. And so by increasing that charge, he was able to increase the rate of growth. And then he tried flipping the polarity, and that would interrupt bug cycles and all this different stuff. So it would have some interesting effects in those sort of terms. But for growing, there seems to be a definite correspondence to the level of atmospheric energy, and how easy it is for things to grow. And this sort of leads into a bigger question, again, to the hermetically sealed sort of world that we're in, is that if you increase the energy within the world, what happens to us, or what happens to the growth of everything? And so when we look back at some of the old world buildings that clearly
Antiquitech, right?
yeah, clearly built for larger stature people, this might be just a matter of amounts of energy in the system at any one time.
Hmm.
So it seems reasonable enough that if you increase the energy, free energy in the world, in a sense, uh, easier to utilize, then things would naturally get bigger.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, in a similar way, I mean, people might look at cathedrals, or they might look at these older structures, as you had mentioned, and what people refer to as antiquitech, they're really saying that these buildings weren't just buildings. They were part of a power grid, or a an ancient way to tap into that polarity between the sky and the earth that we established earlier. And I'm curious, do you feel like, in a conspiratorial way, which, I love getting into that, is this kind of like why Tesla's work was so covered up? So, because the story is that, he was going to put certain industries out of business by tapping into like a free energy source. And also, in the same way, going back to that TV show Lost, they do play around with the idea of a snow globe, and that we are housed in this self-contained system, like you're saying. So it's almost like
Yeah.
maybe someone like Tesla was able to tap into that system, and this was not financially sound. What do you think about the whole Tesla rabbit hole and how it relates to what we are discussing here?
Um, I'm sort of on the boundary when it comes to my mindset on him, because he is promoted so much. It seems like when things get that much attention, that there's more than likely a red herring. Um, the other thing is that he could have just been finding older uh, information and then started to play around with it and learn about it, and understood it in a better way than we do. Um, the buildings themselves, it's there's a few just oddities, and you can't say, well, for us today to try and pull energy out of the air is extremely difficult. There just isn't enough there to pull it out of. Do you know what I mean? There's nothing to
The
intercept.
concentration's too low for us to really get anything out of it. Maybe before
Yeah,
it was higher concentration.
yeah, maybe that's true. And it depends on what they were doing underground. It's hard to know how they were setting things up underground. especially because with all these buildings and they're all mud flooded and they're basically, one or two stories underground, under the mud. So whatever was below that, we don't have any idea. Were they using water in a different way? They could have been. There's many different ways that they could have um, been playing around with energy. It is odd that um, they built such big buildings and they didn't have electricity or something like that to actually heat the houses. A lot of the, I don't know if you know this, but a lot of the chimneys in those old world houses aren't really chimneys. They were too small to be useful as a fire. They didn't give out hardly any heat, and the actual tubes, the flues of them were so small that it didn't even draw properly.
Hmm.
So they'll use for something else. So heating for these, gigantic castles and large buildings, and unless you live in a world that is completely sort of different to how ours is, with its such the cold and
Yeah, there's
the
quite a
wet and all the
polarity.
rest of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to
Unless
stay
that,
at one temperature for too long.
yeah, but it does seem, from what I can gather, and this is just my own personal viewpoint of it, is that our history doesn't go that far back that far.
Hmm.
It's really like 200 to 500 years, and then all of it's pretty well hidden, or
Hmm.
it's not well known, or it's just basically made up by these people in,
Yeah, I mean,
you know
speaking of that, like, do you what if you were so for me personally, like I love looking at the World's Fairs, the World's Exposition as a way to kind of point out like, hey, that doesn't make sense. But if you had met someone who wasn't aware of the World's Fair timeline conspiracy, how would you
Okay.
break it down? Because you have a really great understanding of the mud flood story, and I'm curious because I'll just say this, I recently found out about the Vulcan statue, which is in downtown Birmingham, Alabama. It was created by a guy from Italy who has also worked on the Rothschild's Palace. I forgot where the palace is exactly, in the UK maybe. And this mason, this architect or the sculptor who sculpted this statue, allegedly, um, it was created for the World's Fair. Like they're like, we're gonna build this for the World's Fair. Um, and there's, it's interesting just to kind of go down that line of thinking, like, well, what were some of these things constructed for the World's Fair, or had they been around much longer? And so I'm curious how you might break that down for someone who maybe is a little less familiar. What would you say?
Okay, so in general, what we see when we look back, further into our history, is that all of these old, we call them old world buildings, but they are usually made out of red brick. Um, they are built to a quality that we don't see today. They usually have furnishings on them that are uh, extremely, what would you say, well done. They're so brilliantly made, and they have such an eye for beauty, in a sense, that they stand out. They are a lot larger in stature, as in, if you would think of a queen's palace,
Hmm.
or something like that, or those sort of buildings. They usually have spires on the top of them. Um, they have signatures that are sort of not just found in one city, and they usually go under they call them Greco-Roman buildings,
Right.
or Gothic buildings, or whatever you
Hmm.
want to have. But these buildings are found all over. It doesn't matter where you go, you're going to see the same type of architecture. And it's my understanding that the old world had a very good understanding of this, mercurial type god, in a sense. it was the architecture god,
Mm.
or the
Hmm.
architect, like in the Matrix, you know.
Right.
And so God is basically was understood to be a geometra, and be a part of that. So when they're building these buildings, they have a very, very good understanding of geometry, and there is a specific sort of um, bunch of measurements that they use that uh, are harmonic in nature.
Mm.
And so when they're building these buildings, they are musically sound in a sense. They have a relationship to music. And that means that you can describe them as music in stone, if you like.
Like when you go back to proportions and dimensions, they're arranged in a way that goes with a sacred geometrical
Yep.
structure. It's
Yep.
interesting.
And it's all sort of directed straight out of the flower of life.
Mm.
And yeah, based around a sort of number 37 and a few others. So that's what's really important about it. And what then something seems to, a cataclysm of some description seems to have happened where these buildings are all buried, at least um, to the first or second floor.
Mm.
And then so a lot of the photos we get are actually basically empty cities, and they'll have dirt roads with these beautiful buildings.
Mm.
And from then on, there has been a progressive, um, a very real attempt to deface and destroy all of this old world architecture. And so there seems to be a transition that occurred. And there is a transition in information too,
Mm.
from a high level information, a coherent level of information, to a very low reset type of information. And that's where we've come into play. And that's where sort of uh, a heliocentric model started to
Mm.
take hold as well. And um, it's just really interesting. You have these full cityscapes that can, hundreds of thousands of people can live there, and they're completely empty. So whatever happened was on a massive scale.
Right,
And
right. Yeah, that's there's, besides the empty like those eerie looking photos where there's a huge building, no one's around, you just see like a very muddy area. And then there's also the stories about orphan trains, and
yep.
millions of children were shipped off, and they arrived. And I've also heard this term, like the arrivals, these people were shipped out to a new city, after some kind of cataclysm. It could be a mud flood, like there's definitely evidence for that, but it could be a whole range of cataclysms, floods, earthquakes. I mean, look at
Yep.
Turkey and Syria recently, and so things like that tie back into the World's Fair, because when I imagine history being changed, I would imagine a couple examples. Like obviously, history is written by the victors, and if a country or a people are being colonized, then the elite class will rewrite history in their favor. Especially like if you look at the stories of slavery in the U.S., it was basically protocol to not let um, the African slaves become educated, because then
Mm.
the status quo could be maintained, and this and that, the hegemonic structure. So I'm
Well,
curious,
well, that's what it's all. Yeah, that's what
that's
it's all about, isn't it? It's if you're going to maintain control of any, it's about keeping information away.
mm,
That's all it is, and you just make up any old story to misdirect from the real information.
yeah. So how would you
Um, but
introduce the World's Fair? Because it seems to be an essential narrative to bring about this transition, as if like this was part of a plan to remove a cultural historical understanding from the entire population. Maybe only a select few really remember how things were, whereas the masses are put under some kind of spell. How would you introduce that kind of idea?
Um, well, the World Fairs, some of the buildings you like, they were already there.
Mm,
They didn't make them. There are sort of videos and things of people making statues out of plaster in Paris and types of that sort of stuff. But they seem to be almost like a showcase of the old world,
right.
and before it sort of got disappeared in a sense. Like it was like, oh yeah, check out all this stuff.
Mm.
It's just like,
Look
and
at what we
that's what
found.
was. It's what it seems like in some, like there's like videos of people crashing these um steam trains together,
Mm.
just for fun. And it's like, like it's like just like everyone went wild afterwards, and it's got so much stuff everywhere, and it's
Hmm.
I don't know why. Just they don't seem like, yeah. It's just like a showcase of like, check it out. Well, and this is what we've
And then
got,
they
and
burned it
then
all down.
yeah, and then it's like, yeah, okay, we can't have that.
Right.
Um, I think a lot of it, one of my sort of things that I was really starting when I was still really starting to wake up in a
Mm.
sense, was learning about the financial system. I'm like, well, why is this
Mm.
world so fucking, well, unfair in a lot of ways? And then you start to get into the financial system, and you go, oh, okay, so that now that makes a lot of sense. That someone can print money and you can't, and that's
That's not
basically
gonna
it.
work.
So
Yeah.
I, it's just this whole world's like an episode of I'm rich and you're poor.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So and so really to maintain um that system, it takes work. It takes a lot of people to not understand who they are, where they are, how much power they have. Um, and really, if you're going to maintain a system like the one we have, you have to breed ignorance
Yeah. Mm.
constantly. You have to keep money in the world, as you have to get people fighting constantly about nonsense. You just can't have them all wake up and go, well, maybe you should just fucking end the Fed,
Well, yeah,
you
this
know,
is the matrix that people describe. It's like just get people to not question anything and go about their day to day, and things will run, business as usual, right? People will take the blue pill.
and that's it. And it's like, they don't realize that their money is getting devalued in their pockets, or,
Mm.
while they sleep. Um, and so the system is inherently built against life. It's a debt-based system. It's anti-life. It's anti abundance.
Right.
And so, because it is that, it flies directly in the face of nature, which is inherently abundant.
Mm.
It's always overproducing what it needs. And so to work against nature like that, you need to actually be very, very, uh, you know,
Malevolent.
yeah,
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 yeah.
that's the word.
I mean, when
Yeah,
you
that's
brought
right.
up the northern symbolism earlier, I always immediately think about Frankenstein. Have you read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein before?
No, I haven't. No.
Okay, yeah, I asked Mario about this too. It's interesting because this is the same problem of man trying to go against nature. I guess our friend Juan would joke about the homunculus, and this is like almost like nature gone awry in a way. It's like this creation is breaking the natural laws. Maybe, I don't know. There's so many different ways you can spin it, but then the Dr. Frankenstein who does this chases this creation all the way to the north, and that's like leading him back within to himself. So the reason I bring this up is because as a segue in a solution oriented mindset, we're aware that the matrix is this vampiric Federal Reserve, fractional reserve banking system that tries to steal our energy. Yet we still live in abundance. Just people forget about it. So How do you personally, even in a place like Australia, and I think a lot of people in the US have maybe associated, if they're in a certain camp, they would associate what's happening with Australia, what's happened throughout COVID in a very fearful way. Like Australia
Yeah.
seemed like they went really deep into the totalitarian side of things, and that was concerning. And my heart goes out to people who were told, you can't go to the beach, you must put on your mask and go home. And that really concerns me. And yet, things seem to have bounced back. Is that true? Like, have things felt like they've gone back to normal, or do you feel like there's still this
Mm.
oppressive cloud hanging over where you're at now?
Uh, it's gone back to normal in a
Hmm.
sense. I don't think it's ever going to be quite normal.
Right,
You
right.
know what I mean?
The
Like,
new normal, yes. Yeah.
yeah. But people are definitely trying to get back a semblance of what it was like
Yeah.
before. And in a sense, it has gone back like that. But um, I just, and our governments, they're fucking crazy, you know.
Right.
There's no two ways about it. Like
Hmm.
they just are what they are. And Australians have always, in a sense, had a sense of that as like, oh yeah, whatever, mate, and just give them the low twos and
Right, right.
send them on their way. But um, it just depends on what's going to happen, the next sort of thing, and
Yeah.
how it all plays out. We don't know. We don't know what's around the corner. We don't know how it's going to play out. Yeah, I don't even know how well their plan went with
That's a good point.
the
Yeah.
shots and everything like that. I
Mm.
mean, it got rid of a few, but was it really what they wanted? I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting
Um,
to speculate on that. And I'm curious, as I kind of alluded to earlier, I was curious from the solution oriented mindset, because we know that there's something else coming, and some people speculate that it's climate lockdowns and all this. But the question I really wanted to get to kind of wrap up is, how can you personally, or what suggestions might you put forth for people who are looking to tap into that abundance, to remember where we really come from, and to kind of break away from this shackled kind of mindset where there's we must escape but we cannot escape. And I think the real beauty is understanding that there's nowhere to escape to unless you go within. So where do you find abundance in your mindset, in your lifestyle? What kinds of things might you suggest for people um, who can sense that something is rotten in the state of Denmark?
yeah, well, surprisingly, like everything since that, like it was pretty hard for me to go through all the COVID and
Mm,
not being able to do my farming and things like that as I. But after that, yeah, I've worked on my own mindset, as you say,
nice.
like my own abundance mentality, and that has helped a lot, you know, and really just been focusing on stuff that I want to do,
Mm,
and I built a farm, an organic farm, so I've got that there. And I've been working that. I've got a catering business,
nice.
and I've bought silver because I know that if you're going to bet against the debt, as Gregory Mannarino says, you bet against the debt, become your own central bank.
Mm,
So you're taking power into your own hands. You understand that real money is gold and silver, and so you hold on to that and have it in your own physical possession. And that helps me sleep at night as well.
mm,
We um, we sort of live fairly, I live fairly frugally. I don't just spend willy nilly. I just buy sort of what I need, and we're pretty happy with what we're doing. And I just urge people to sort of get it in their head that they don't have to, just because there's sort of like a bad stigma about money, and it's like,
mm.
no, you can have it. It's just energy,
Right.
and allow yourself to have it. You know, you can have the more money, more energy you have, the more you're able to do.
Yeah,
So just say, don't build a negative sort of framework around it. And I've been guilty of that as well.
me too.
Uh, so, if you're going to embrace being abundance, the abundance like nature and live in accordance with that, it means you have more money than probably what you need.
Mm.
And it's just a fact of being in that mentality. And so, ever since I've said, I accept abundance in my life, and
Welcome it.
yeah, it's like, well, um, and I always was saying this one repetitively to myself. It was like, my bank accounts always has more than I need.
Right. Yeah, you can affirm
It's
that for yourself. Yeah.
yeah, and it's just again, it's just an abundance mindset, and what that was doing, and it's like I've had it when bank accounts been really low, but I haven't needed it, and
Mm.
every time I need some money, I'm like, oh, there's plenty in there. I'm like,
Right. It'll
well,
just
that's
show up
sweet.
whenever you need it. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
man.
but it can even be more than that.
Mm.
I'm still learning this, but it's one of those things you start trying to live in alignment. The northern symbolism, the Trinity, all that starts to really help ground you, be in alignment,
Mm.
um, and yeah, it just gives you a sense of the world isn't as bad
Oh no.
as what they put on the news and stuff. It's just most of it's just bullshit trying to
Yep.
scare you into something.
Despite what they say, this is a great place to find ourselves in, and I'm grateful that we were brought together. I want to ask you something else too about just things I've heard. It was cool getting to know to learn more about you, Lucas, and I am aware that you're a musician. I mean, I spotted the guitar in the background, but I actually,
I
when I listened to your awesome episode with homie Romy and Danunaki, you brought up the music project that you're working on, and what a great way to become in to follow your alignment and to tap into harmonic energy and to welcome in a really positive spirit in this dark world. What's going on with your music project? Is there anything you want to share with people who might want to check it out? Because I personally, just from meeting you, I would love to hear the music that you produce. I'm a drummer myself. I think you said you
oh
were
yeah, yeah,
doing
yeah,
like all the
sweet.
instruments. So yeah, man,
Yeah,
that's
yeah. I'm a drummer by heart. That's where
yeah,
that was my first instrument. I remember seeing some boys that they brought it into school in grade 6 and set it up, and I was like, wow, I got to do that.
nice.
So I ended up learning drums, but and then guitar later on. But I've got a EP in the works. I've just got to get it mastered,
Mm.
find some money to send it away and get that done, and then it'll be all hunky dory, and I'll try and
Nice.
put
You're in
it
that
somewhere.
post production phase. I can see. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right on, man.
and
Yeah.
I've also been working on a app. It's going to be a new calendar app.
Oh,
Um,
nice. Wow.
So it's a conversion app between the 365-day calendar Gregorian calendar that we have,
Mm.
and a 364-day calendar, the original one.
Mm.
So that's the initial project, and that's only a couple of months away before that's going to be released. And I should have a website where I'm going to start putting together some of this material I've been collecting and really starting to share it, and hopefully create a sort of like an online little workshop or school or something like that. So it's going to be interesting to see how that goes.
That sounds awesome, man. You got a lot of projects going on. That app sounds really cool, and I'm happy you're able to teach me quite a lot. And we had a lot of fun, just kind of going through some ideas. And there's something I want to close on as kind of just for fun, but something that spontaneously came to me. And I feel like when you're in alignment in certain ways, ideas will just come to you, like the that etheric Wi-Fi network that I talked about earlier. You just tap into
Yeah,
it and you get something. I was thinking about one of my favorite songs by MGMT, which I guess you were saying they're from Australia, aren't they?
I thought they were. Yeah, I
Okay.
don't. I'll have to look it up, but yeah, I
Yeah, it's
thought they
like
were
MGMT,
Australian band.
maybe Rat-a-tat. but they've got this song Electric Feel, and I just want to look at one of the verses. This is the second verse. It says, all along the eastern shore, put your circuits in the sea. This is what the world is for, making electricity. You can feel it in your mind, or you can do it all the time. Plug it in, change the world. You are my electric girl. It's really cool that
Yeah,
this concept can apply so many different places. We talked about electrochemistry. You talked about electric culture with agriculture. There's so
yeah.
much I want to learn about, and I appreciate you for the inspiration and for all the research that you've been doing, man. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Lucas, and I love to chat again soon. Especially thanks to Mario, who I originally heard this from. I really want to learn more about the northern symbolism. So I'm hoping I can brush up on that, and I look
Yeah.
forward to setting up something else in the future. So as we wrap up, is there anything you want to leave the audience with? One last message, anything at all that you want to close out with? Let's say our
Um,
farewell.
no, no, that's about it for now. But if people want to sort of, they can check out my YouTube, or they can come and join me on Telegram. I'll give you the link, and maybe you can put it underneath or
Right on.
something.
Yeah, check those links in the
Um,
description for sure. Is there a YouTube video that you're working on, or like a new concept that you're playing around with that you want to publish soon?
I've sort of stepped back from a lot of the YouTube videos,
Mm,
just because they take so much time, effort,
really do.
and it just something that I haven't been sort of felt the vibe for. I haven't felt
Mm,
like doing it. Eventually I will, but I've been sort of rather putting my energies into a book,
nice.
and building it that way, and then from there I think I'll start to really expand. But yeah, putting all the thoughts into a cohesive bunch of writing, which is going to be it's quite a project, and it's
Yeah,
probably
man.
taken me a fair while, but
Mm.
that's where I've sort of really wanted to explain things rather than just in the video form.
That's so cool, man. Well, I'm wishing you the absolute best. I'm looking forward to all these different projects. Glad we were connected. I honestly can't remember how we were connected, but all of our mutual friends, many of whom we brought up tonight, want to thank the whole community. And yeah, Lucas, I appreciate you, man. Once again, wishing you the absolute best, and thanks for coming on Local Listens, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Peace.